Welcome to the Quilt Show. Over the past 18 years, we have featured many talented scrap quilters, and we thought we'd put together a master class on working with scraps just for you. But wait till you hear who's on the show. It's, let me see, I don't remember. Scrap! I can't remember. Scrap! And now, your hosts for the Quilt Show, Alex Anderson and Ricky Timms.
Welcome to the Quilt Show. We know there are a lot of you out there who love scrappy quilts.
So much so that we wanted to put together a special show, or what we call a master class, with talented textile artists who have been on the Quilt Show and know a thing or two about working with scraps.
Up first, Bonnie K. Hunter has wonderful ideas for not only making star blocks with scraps, but also some great tips for building a ready-made scrappy stash.
What's this?
You are the queen of scraps and scrap management. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's just really smart.
Okay, well, I like to think of taming my scraps the same way I would doing the dishes. So I don't cut into new yardage or new fat quarters to cut strips from. I will take the leftovers of a project as I am cleaning up from that project. And if that piece of fabric is smaller than, say, half a fat quarter, you can judge what size you want to. I will cut it down into the sizes of strips that work together to form most traditional patchwork blocks.
Okay.
So for instance, I will work with 1.5 inch strips, 2 inch strips, 2.5 inch strips, and 3.5 inch strips. These all come from cutting down the leftovers of the previous project that I'm working on.
Okay, so why those numbers?
Because the math works to create the units that we work with the most. I can sew 3 1.5 inch strips together, and these are directly from my scraps from my cutting table, so they don't match anything. I can sew 3 of these together and pair it with a 3.5 inch strip. The math works, okay? You can sew 2 inch strips together and come up with the same strip set height of 3.5 inches. I can sew a 2.5 to a 1.5, and it comes out to 3.5 inches.
Because you say that most blocks, traditional blocks, are how big?
Well, we have blocks mostly in 6 inch, 8 inch, 9 inch, and 12 inch finished sizes.
You're right, I hadn't thought about that.
And that's just a grid that breaks down into different unit size. So our 4 patches or half square triangles or other traditional units that make the blocks that we know and love so well always finish out these certain sizes.
Okay, what are the cut sizes again? Recap.
1.5 inch, 2, 2.5, and 3.5. You'll notice there's no 3 inch there because it doesn't play well.
And then do you store them in boxes of light and dark, or just all together?
I used to sort them in boxes of light and dark, but once I had one stackable drawer that was full, and instead of starting another one, I separated them by color family.
Oh, wow.
So now I will have blue 2.5 inch strips, or yellow 2 inch strips, or green 3.5 inch strips, so that when I'm making a project, I look at what size the unit needs to be, and I go to that color family first.
Okay, so you love half square triangles.
I do.
I mean, it's obvious in your quilts.
I do.
So you got some cool tricks about that, and then
Yeah,
what do you do?
I do. Well, you know, when you're cutting for half square triangles, the regular mathematical formula is to add 7/8 to the finished size.
Right.
I don't know about you, but I don't like 7/8.
Well, I have to count.
It's difficult. But I use this tool called the Easy Angle. They've got the dog ear notched off at the top of the ruler right here. And simply by removing the height of that dog ear, which is 3/8 of an inch, I can get my 2 inch finished half square triangles from a 2.5 inch strip by using the ruler.
Okay, so show me here.
Okay, so what I've got here is 2 strips right sides together. You're going to cut this in already matched pairs so that it's ready to feed through the machine, so you're not handling that bias. I'm going to put the 2.5 inch line on the end of the strip set, and I have already trimmed this strip set out.
Before you cut, I want to hold it up, okay? So people can really see. Explain here what's going on.
Okay, so I've got my 2 strips right sides together. I've got the bottom edge of the ruler along the strip set, and here's a line that says 2.5, and it comes up the end of the strip, and there's a little arrow right there that tells me that I'm placed correctly.
Perfect.
Okay, and I'm going to cut. This gives me one matched pair. I'm going to move the strip set, leaving just a little bit of daylight right there, and I'm going to roll the ruler on its hinges right here, and I'm going to just flip that right side over, find the 2.5-inch line again, and now this black dog ear is hanging off the bottom of the strip set. Can you see that?
Yep, just like that.
Okay.
Okay.
When that will give us the missing dog ear that's at the top.
And that's
of the
how you
ruler.
can do it with 2.5-inch
Yes.
strips. I'm loving it.
Yes, so I would flip the ruler back now, and I would continue to work my way all the way down the end of the strip set.
Okay.
We have our triangles already cut, and I would love to show you how I feed these through the machine.
Okay, let me get out of the way.
Okay. And
So
before-
what's going on under here now with these squares?
Well, you know how people will take a folded over scrap of fabric and sew onto
Right.
it at the end of their chain
The
of piecing?
thread catchers.
The thread catcher, the thread bunny, the sew between,
That's
the
the one Ricky
spider,
likes, yeah.
whichever one it is. What generally happens, I mean, it's a great idea, but after you've sewn over that piece of fabric again and again and again, where does it end up?
Well, it ends up that fat in the garbage.
Right. How would you like to make more quilts in less time?
There you go.
Okay. So what I've got here is just a stack of 2-inch squares that I have cut with right sides together. And I'm setting these right by my machine, and I'm going to start chain piecing. I sewed one of these pairs through the machine first, and then I'm just going to chain. When I get to the end of my chain, I'm going to grab another pair of those squares and sew my regular 1/4-inch seam.
I have to tell you, when my girlfriends learned to quilt or started quilting or tried to make one quilt, she didn't know about chain piecing. And she goes, all that thread?
All that thread.
Yeah. And time.
And time, really, and it makes your bobbins run so much longer. Okay, so let's say I had reached the end of my chain and I've got my 457 half square triangles.
Hundreds.
Okay, actually I like to sew in groups of about 10 or 20.
Okay.
And then I will throw a leader ender through, and it helps me keep count of how many pairs have gone through the machine.
Oh.
Okay, so I've got half of this 1/4 patch here. I
Okay.
will sew another one through at the end of the chain, and guess what happens the next time I need one? I will join these two pairs to each other, have a 4 patch, and set it aside. So you can completely build like a quilt of valor, or
Right.
a donated quilt, or piece the borders for a quilt you're already working on. In between the lines of chain piecing other things, you can make better use of your time and thread simply by thinking ahead far enough to have just a small stack of something by your machine.
Okay, so let's come over to the playboard here,
yeah.
okay? So you make yourself a ton of half square triangles.
Correct.
And with anything in mind particularly, or not really?
Depends. I love half square triangles, and there's so many different ways that you can play with them. For instance, I can take these units here and lay them out in broken dishes blocks.
I'm going to tilt it up just a little bit.
Can
There
you
we go.
see this? Now I had fun playing in my scraps to make these ahead of time to bring, and I want you to know that these are just ordinary everyday scraps that we all have. I even have people send me their scraps. And you know when it's still ugly, you just didn't cut it small enough? So half square triangles are the perfect way to use up these. I've just separated here into 2 color families. So I've got a wide variety of blues, and I love neutrals. The more different neutrals I can put together, the better. So I've laid out here an hourglass unit. When we sew this together, it's going to look like this.
I understand
Just like
somebody
this.
sent you that fabric and you used it.
If you still have Millennium fabric in your stash, it's not getting any newer. So we need to cut it small. When you join the hourglass units together, we get half stars, just like this. So I'm going to grab this over your mat here. Do you see how I have a
Pretty snazzy design
pretty
wall here,
snazzy
right?
design wall, but you know what? It works, and that's what matters. I love variety, and having my scraps cut into sizes I already use means that I can get this variety without having to cut into 16 fat quarters first.
So once you make this initial block here, okay, here's where the darks are, here's where
Yeah.
the lights are, do you just sit and make them and not worry about it?
I do. I know that I need 36 of these for this quilt, or 84 of these for this quilt, and that's when I put on a chick flick movie and just keep treadling.
There you go.
Okay.
Let's take a look at the finished block.
All right,
Where'd it
we've
go?
got it's right
here.
here.
It is. Okay.
But you know, this is a magic block. I've got block halves right here. So if you look closely, you'll see that this is a light star inside of a blue octagon. But look what happens when I move this half to this side. Now I've got the blue star on the neutral octagon. And the Jamestown Landing quilt we'll be showing has both stars, but they all come from the same broken dishes unit sewn into half stars that can go either way. So it's a lot easier to make the half stars and decide which one's going to be a blue star, which one's going to be a neutral star, than trying to make two different sets.
You know, Alex, when you're learning from Bonnie, you're learning from the best.
What she says just makes so much sense.
Absolutely. Another guest that we had on our show who makes intriguing miniature composition blocks with improv and scraps is Lynn Carson Harris.
Using small scraps and a block you might know well, Lynn will get your scrappy juices going.
Well, the log cabin block, as you may know, just starts with a center and then you add logs around, traditionally going around in a circle, but you don't have to keep going around. You could add them on
Two sides.
And
then top and bottom.
Right.
Like courthouse steps. Yeah.
They don't all have to be the same size. You can add fat ones and skinny ones. And
this is so happy. That's what I get excited about. You know, it's not rigid, it's happy, it's free. All right, so get into it and tell us how to make these little blocks.
Okay, when I start, I get my fabrics out and I tend to have them arranged sort of size-ish. So I've got bigger chunks and long skinny pieces, and then arranged so that they're easier to pick. And to start, I also like to work with scissors. So I can cut a piece like first center, and I see this piece is kind of about the same size as that, so I'll sew these together.
Right, so as you're going over there, I'm just pointing out they weren't exactly the same height, but close enough.
No, yeah, close enough. And I typically work just chain piecing a lot of blocks. I don't work on one at a time, so I can find another piece, and what might I like to put next to that?
A little yellow, maybe?
A little yellow. I could do it, yeah, this way.
Would that work?
Would that work?
To me, this is therapeutic.
So I just keep feeding them through. It is.
Just picking and not having to worry and so forth.
And so here I've had some that I've put 2 logs on. So I'm going to add my next piece, and I could add it on this side.
But that really is kind of short for that first side,
yeah,
isn't it?
but it fits better over here.
It fits really good over there, yep.
So when I'm adding this next one, this is where I can decide how large this. I could take my ruler and look at it and say, okay, I want, where's my 1/4 inch? I'm going to lose this much, and then trim it. What angle do I want? But I like the surprise approach.
Sure.
So I just kind of lay it down at some random angle.
But I like how you flipped it back, just so that there's a little bit of a reveal of what will happen.
Do I know what's going to happen? And then I feed that one through.
So now you're just paying attention to the top fabric.
Right.
And the other, I'm going to assume, rightfully or wrongly, you're going to cut that off and use that as a scrap for something else.
Yep. So I bring it over here, and then I just use my scissors and trim to this seam allowance, and then press this open. And then I have this pre-made log that I could add to something else that might go on this block somewhere, so I could try that.
And you were talking, as before we rolled cameras, that this is how you work, right here on these little ironing, cutting, sewing, just everything is right there, so it's within fingers reach, really.
When I'm making small blocks, this is the perfect setup for me. I can trim, use the rotary cutter if I want there. I use my tiny little iron and press my tiny little
Now, do you
blocks.
trim off that piece in the back?
Yeah, I'll trim that off.
And that piece can then be used for something else.
Put that on maybe one of these.
Oh, and yeah, see, I forgot about those, because it's been like 3 minutes and I don't have a long memory.
So I could then stitch this, kind of audition it how I want.
Okay, I see what's
Then
going to
add
happen.
that onto here, and then just keep going. And I just make lots of blocks.
All right, but you also make these little blocks and you like put them on a design wall. I think we have a photo of that. Have you working, now maybe not with the log cabin blocks, but we've got a photo showing how you don't know where you're going here.
Right, I'm just having fun making like small compositions. And then these may or may not, actually these are kind of the same size. I might just sew these together. So sometimes I build them a little bigger as I go, but I don't usually get much bigger than this before I move to the design wall. I know with this one had the small pieces and played around with them for how I wanted them to fit together.
Sure, and looking at your design wall, I see that you've got different projects going on at one time. So you've got enough design wall space that you can work on something, you can let it stew, and then go on from there.
Right, I have a quilt like for every mood. When I want to do fussy precision or free form, and then I mull over the others in the back of my mind.
Right. Do you find that whenever you're working on the design wall that the quilt ends up being I know you're the facilitator, but let it be the decision maker?
That's true, it really is. Sometimes it has to age, it has to grow up a little on the design wall, and then it tells me what it wants to be. And sometimes that it has a neighbor on the design wall that was going to be a different project, and sometimes they merge.
Yeah, I can see how that can happen. And I have to tell you, if this is not the way you've ever worked, I just would encourage you to take a Saturday or a Sunday and just get out some fabric and start cutting. And don't worry about what you're going to make. Just make little bits and then let the quilt start having a voice, because it is a wonderful experience. So, all right, let's look at some other quilts that you've done that use this technique. Let's bring this one in.
Right, these are a little more straight log cabin, but they're all squared to the same size, where the previous one, they were all different sizes, but then this was set with a sashing.
Sure, and I can see that
It's a bit more color controlled.
Absolutely. I want to go back to this one because I forgot. I would like for you to discuss how this was assembled. Now, the neighborhoods, the sections.
Okay, so I've got 4 blocks here that went together as a unit.
Like a 4-patch.
Like a little 4-patch, and then these went together. This was a little group, and then this was a strip here.
It looks like you then created this whole area with some...
Right, and then to make it long enough to match this, I had put little coping strips in there. This strip was added all as one. And then I had it put together, and then I just square up. It has like extra bits hanging off usually. And this one, I would have had to square it off and then lose some of this. So I added this little corner down here.
And I have
just
to tell
give
you,
me a little bit.
That did not get out of my mind when I came over here. I was like, oh, that makes me happy. And I mean, that I noticed that little piece, and it made me happy. And now I know why, because this was too short. And if you had squared it all off,
It would have missed a lot of this little block there.
that's fabulous. Let's look at this one. This is one that we saw earlier. This is the broken. Yeah.
And this one, it's a more traditional log cabin, but I kept repeating the one fabric to give it a background and more airiness. So these blocks just have the black center, and then I kept going around.
Oh, and by the way, that's like 1/8 of an inch. That's just tiny right there. But you can do it with this technique that you just did, because you're not having to measure
And then with the surprise approach, as I was putting the logs on, with this one right here, I ended up cutting off the little corner of the blue. And if I had been trimming with my rotary cutter, I would not have done that. I would have said, well, I want to have my corner and give me 1/4 of an inch. But with the surprise approach, I opened it up and I thought, oh, I cut it off. And I go, but I like it. I like it. So then I tried to make it happen a little bit more, other places, and
I think
cutting
you were
off the
stretching
point
the envelope here. You were trying to get these into 1/16 of an inch, because I mean, that's just crazy skinny right there. But I really do love it. And then this one, look at this, everyone. So it doesn't have to be a miniature, right?
Yeah,
you can work larger
the same
scale.
technique, just larger scale.
Wow, I love this.
Well, that was fun.
And very doable.
We have so much more packed in this show for you. And coming up next, Susan Carlson is serving up some wonderful scrap collage. If you haven't seen Susan Carlson's work before, you do not want to miss this. Welcome back. When we had Susan Carlson on our show
It was like 13 years ago, right?
Was it really?
Yeah, believe it or
wow.
not.
The animals she created with vibrant small scraps were simply stunning.
Susan is recreating the animal kingdom in colorful and memorable ways. Her way to be scrappy makes anyone happy. Take a look at this.
Well, today we're going to be working with this wonderful sea turtle. Where did you get this image?
This was from a Dover Publications book. It's copyright-free images. A lot of times people ask me where I get some of my images from, and this is a great sort of a resource. And I do love, animals, and some of those mythical animals that were drawn back in the 1400s are just really fun places to start.
I do collect Dover books. I think they're a
Yeah.
great resource for quilters.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you have your image and you're all set for that, now it's gotten bigger on us.
Yes, well, I kind of took that initial image and simplified it.
Okay.
And so I simplified it, made it into more of a line drawing, and got it onto paper, and then slipped it underneath my fabric and traced over.
And somebody could take it to a copy store if they didn't feel so comfortable with a
Right.
pen and cloth, and then just get it blown up and get a blueprint, basically.
Right, you still want to get it on cloth though, because we're going to use this as a foundation to start filling in.
Okay, now you brought some interesting fabrics with us, and we discussed this a little bit before we went to break, but these are pretty wonderful fabrics here.
They are.
So here you've got some great, what are these, half yards?
Oh, there's a whole variety. Yeah, I'll get whatever appeals to me that particular day. But what I did is I selected fabrics that work for a turtle.
Look
You know,
turtleistic.
look turtley, yeah, right. Kind of tortoise-shelly sort of things. At least in my mind, they look turtley.
And then you have these that are
Tortoisey.
smaller.
Yes, yep. So these are some larger ones, some smaller ones. We were talking earlier about how I organize fabrics. So there's some folded, and then they start getting too small to fold anymore. So then
This is the gold right here.
yeah, this is what I really love working with.
Okay, so I'm just going to take these and,
Yeah.
oh, wait a minute, what about these?
Yeah, that is, I do enjoy working with batiks. I find it's a really, batiks blend well when you put them together. And so this was a packet that Hoffman gave me, and so it's perfect colors. They must have known.
Well, it's wonderful because they're little skinny pieces,
Yeah.
but there's a ton of different fabrics
It's a great
there.
variety, right? So for something like this, they fit the bill for working in the variety that I want. Because if you want variety more than quantity,
Okay,
that's what's important.
so here you go.
Okay, so this is what I work with. These are my palettes. So instead of dabs of paint, I'm using dabs of fabric. And so what I'll do is I'll start collecting my fabric. So here I've got my fabric collected. I'll have some sort of idea of what color sequence I might like to do.
Sure.
If I'm doing values, where the values are going to fall. Turtle shell, maybe, it does come out. I'll do lighter colors here, do some darker colors on the outside. So I'll start pawing through and find the lighter fabrics, and I'll start laying them in place just, very randomly. And I'll start almost like a little jigsaw puzzle. And it's really kind of fun to see how they start working together.
Now, you've said something really key while you keep playing there, is that if something is coming towards you in the imagery, you want it to be a light value, and if it's going away from you, you want it to be a dark value, and that's how you get the
Correct.
curve of the shell.
Right, right. And that gives you a little visual. It lets the fabric do some of the work for you. And what I do, sometimes you find just the right
Oh, look
fabric
at that. It's perfect.
Yeah,
It fits.
It just fits right there in the corner. What I'm doing on this tortoise shell is that I'm going to leave some of my my design, the lines that I drew. I want them to show because I'm going to fill them in later with a darker color. So you can kind of see I'm getting a little bit of value happening on this one. If something's a little too big, let's say, this kind of fits. I can fit this one in, maybe right here.
But you can take your scissors and cut it up, too.
Yes, exactly. So I take my little scissors, and I got it lined up on one edge. I can take and I can snip right here, and I can snip right here.
Do you worry about fabrics tucking under each other and things like that?
No, I actually want them to tuck under. I want something to go underneath the other. And when they do that, they start blending too. Then they all start blending together here. Here, this one fit nicely right in that corner, but of course it overshoots on that side. So here I'll just trim that one down, and then I can trim this one down. And this edge, which is a nice odd little cut edge, when I put something that's straight underneath it, then it starts blending
Okay.
very nicely.
Okay.
So I can kind of work my blending, and I can, maybe I'll find a dark piece, and I know that I want to do some dark maybe on the outer shell, so I'll put the dark there as kind of like a placeholder. Here's another nice dark, and I can put that, someplace else. So I can kind of start working my colors in.
Yeah, those batiks don't rip very easily.
Yeah, so I can just start, like that. See, that
All right.
fit right there.
I
very
get
nicely.
it. I get it. Do you all
Okay.
get it in the audience? Yes. Okay.
And if you have larger pieces, so many times students will come to classes with larger pieces of fabric. And
Well, take
so-
this.
Yeah, so this one, it's a little hard to see how it'll fit because it's so big. So I tell them just cut into your fabric. So just pick a corner and just cut some shapes, maybe kind of follow some of the designs that are in there just a little bit, some of the curves. And then when you lay it down, just move it around just like
Till it
some of the
fits.
other smaller ones and trim it to size. And you'll generate more scraps the more you do that.
And do people share in your classes? I'm going to pick this up because we're going to go to the next
They do.
one. Whoops.
Yeah.
There you
yeah.
go.
It kind of depends on the class, but they're very good about sharing.
At Asilomar, when I snuck into your class and you weren't there, they said, man, when she said bring scraps, she wasn't kidding. So
Yeah, they just don't get it. So in the book, I actually have a photograph of my hand holding some of the scraps to just show what exactly I mean.
now this guy is going to Mardi Gras.
Yes, yeah. So, I picked out fabrics here that are kind of turtley. But for me, I like other colors. It's not realistic colors for animals isn't a necessity. So this one now is kind of a rainbow turtle.
Well, I see some Jane Sassaman fabric in here, and I see some
I love
Kay
her
Facet.
fabric. Yep, both of those are designers that I just love. So sometimes, fabric like that is almost where you kind of kick off and get some of those first ideas about what colors you may like to use.
So I see this leaf that you've used on this turtle.
Yep, and it was perfect. She designed it with, light on one side, dark on the other. I cut out the leaf, cut it in half, and then I started laying them in place. And where they extended over my little drawn segments, I just took and cut, just like you saw before.
And here we have Kay Facet fins.
Yep, the original design, had kind of a radial design. Yep.
I own this fabric. I love it. So look at that.
Yep, I realized that I had something that would work, and so instead of filling in all those little individual shapes, I could just use some of his fabric. I cut it out smaller to start, laid them down, and then just cut the segments. And here, I think 3 or 4 segments worked. You can
Okay.
kind of see. This one took a few extra segments, but because this is a collage, I could just take and slip little pieces to fill in the gaps underneath.
Now you don't always stick to the line drawing. Sometimes you kind of go off.
Right, right. And so if someone has that urge to just kind of go crazy on something, I really want to encourage that because, again, that's that no rules sort of thing. You don't have to follow the lines. They're there as a guideline.
Well, sure, because look at these wonderful circles right in here.
Well, the original drawing had all these great barnacles on the shell, that old, 14th century drawing. And so I cut out some barnacles and put them on.
Now, do you glue this down before you go to the background, or do the background, or what do you do?
Yep, so on this case here, we've got a few pieces that are just loose.
Okay.
So here I found this, and I thought that would work nicely. It's a bright yellow. It works nicely for the top of the kind of the rounded part of the shell. Here's another yellow that would blend nicely with it. I can tuck that under. Another yellow that I can kind of tuck here, and it goes under the barnacle. And then when I get them arranged in the way I like them, I take my glue, and if someone, whoops, that's kind of screwing out there.
Altitude.
So I either put it on my finger or I can use the bottle if it's not gushing out. And I just do a very light smearing of glue.
Is it a water
underneath.
soluble or permanent?
It's water soluble,
Okay.
so that means it doesn't smell bad.
Okay.
It's non-toxic, so I feel okay putting it on my fingers. And, I do a lot of use the glue a lot.
Okay.
So I don't want something that's going to be not good to smell.
So hand me your background fabrics here, because I think that's just as important. When I looked at the finished one, I thought it was all one solid piece of
Right.
background, but it's not. You do the same sort of thing where you just use all this delicious fabric.
Yep. Because I chose on the outside of the shell, there's again some of the Jane Sassaman fabric that has a little bit of the yellow edge to it, and so I thought something that maybe is dark would work nicely. So you can I took my selection of batiks, cut them into smaller shapes, and now I can tuck these under. an important part of the gluing process is to not glue
Yes.
to the edge.
Yes.
So that's something that I really have to repeat to students because it leaves this available so I can now take fabrics and tuck them under and start creating, again, like a background collage. In the same way I've created a collage on the front, I can now do it on the background.
Well, let's take a look at the almost finished product.
So here, it's not rainbow, but it is kind of, alternate colors. And here you can see where I've, started with the light in the center again, worked to some of the darkest around the outside edge here. For the little lines in between the plates, because I've left those edges free when I glued, I could take just a strip of any sort of fabric and just tuck it under.
Nice.
I can lift up the edges, tuck it under,
Nice.
and then I can also work with the shading on those tiny little lines too.
At what point do you decide to square it up, clean it up, or whatever?
Well, I think that this is going to be another series of quilts. And I think
I
I'm gonna
see
do
it
a
coming.
few. Yeah, as I'm starting to work on it, I thought, oh, that'd be nice as a series, lots of little turtles kind of running around. So I'm not sure how I'm finishing it off. And so I wait to see what the final, my final image that I have for display. So this one is kind of, it's unfinished on the edge, but I have some options.
Okay, I'm going to hold this up and let's talk about them.
Well, this one here is something that I've been trying for, about 10 years now. It's a wrapped and glued edge, so it's following the same collage sort of process, but instead of creating one binding, I will take something like this, glue it to the front of it, and then wrap it around back. So it actually continues the collage look.
That's a winner. That's a total winner.
The students love it. They say, you mean I can glue the binding? And I said, yes, you can.
Okay, now what about this one?
Well, that's a traditional binding. That's just, right sides together, stitch, actually using the sewing machine, and turning it around to the back and stitching it. So.
Oh, and I want to just say something here too. We kind of skipped something. Of course, when you have it all glued down, then you just stitch and stitch and stitch and stitch free motion, right?
Right.
And do you care about the pattern that you're free motioning with?
Not usually. I did start out, way back when, I did follow all those little edges, but then I started realizing, with all the glue that I use, I do glue the edges, I leave them free for a while as I'm manipulating it, but then before I quilt, I do go back and I glue all
Clean
those
it all
edges.
up.
OMG, I love Susan Carlson's work, and she really gave some masterclass worthy details in that segment.
Yes, she
Wouldn't you agree?
did. Totally. We learn so much from every artist that comes to our show, but these master classes are really showcasing the incredible diversity and talent in our midst.
Well, you can't have a show on scrap quilts and not include
Edyta
Sitar or Diane Harris, and both of those scrappy geniuses are coming up next.
Welcome back. Ricky, do you remember a long time ago when we taped our shows at a small studio in Boulder, Colorado?
Yeah.
Well, that's when we first met Edyta Sitar.
How can anyone forget Edyta? Once you've met her, you do not forget her. She stole our hearts not only with her undeniable scrappy talents, but also with her endearing personality.
I believe we've had her on the show like 3 times because she has so much to teach us.
She does. Well, I remember her first appearance when she was talking about friendship strip exchanges, OMG, and the possibilities that can be created by expanding your scrap stash. Wait until you see this.
Well, your latest book is Friendships, Strips and Scraps, and it's basically like the triangle exchange, only you're taking it to a whole nother level. But before we get into that, these are just adorable. Explain what these are.
Oh, those are little bundles called cinnamon sticks or twigs, and many shops that do triangle exchange use them in their stores so customers can come in, quilters can come in. It takes the guessing of matching light and a dark. The paper is already inside. Visit your local stores and enjoy fabric exchange with your friends in the stores. You maybe meet a new friend or find an old one that you don't remember that you had.
I think that's just great. Now, as far as strip exchanges go, you have some rules for that.
Well, the rules are very basic. This time when we're doing the exchange, it's very personal. You will take yard to 3 yards of fabric, cut them to strips 1 to 2.5 inches, and go visit with your friends and swap it. And sometimes when I like your fabrics, I will offer you 2 of my strips for 1 of yours. Or maybe you would like something of mine and you will offer me more. So no rules, it's just swapping fabrics.
So within the same exchange, all different sizes.
Yes, you can have all different sizes, because what we're gonna make for this one is a fabric panel from the strips that we exchange. And if you don't feel like cutting strips, you can use pre-cut fabrics from Moda, like sweet rolls, honey buns, or jelly rolls.
I'm hungry.
I know. I was hungry when you talk about the cinnamon sticks.
Exactly.
But let's first make our fabric, then maybe we can eat a little bit.
Okay, that sounds good.
So once we exchange our fabric, we're gonna end up going home with all this multicolored, beautiful strips. Maybe some a little bit brighter. That's good. Good thing to have some brighter ones. You're gonna take them and sew them together to one beautiful panel. And what I like to do is I start on one end, sew it, and then when I'm adding another strip to it, I sew from the other end and sew it down. I use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and again, I use this Orofil thread because it goes with all my colors very nicely. But by sewing from opposite side, you take away some of the waving that the fabric's gonna want it to do. Because you're sewing, and as you can see, I like to mix batiks with printed fabrics, so you're sewing different qualities of fabrics. Also, what helps avoid some of the waving is spray it from the back with starch and press all the seams one direction, and that will give an extra stiffness to the panel, and it's gonna work nice when we cut our pieces.
I can guess that you're very, very careful to make sure that there aren't tucks in here, correct?
Yes, yeah.
And then how wide will you make one of these units?
I like to make them in a size that I can control it. And the most that I can control is 18 inches wide. And sometimes I look at the pattern that I'm gonna use this in it, and it calls, maybe I'm gonna be making a spools, so I look at it just maybe 1/2 inch bigger, I make that panel. So it would be a little bit smaller than this one. But 12 to 18 inches are the most favorite ones that I like to use. Once I have my panel pre-sew, press, and ready to go, I cannot wait to see what I'm gonna come up with it, because I'm gonna take my ruler and cut my shapes. If I need rectangles, I'm gonna just use a regular ruler and a rotary and cut the rectangle 7 by 10, for example, for the beautiful house
That's
quilt.
right.
Yes.
Did you just applique the doors and windows on top then?
Absolutely, that's what I did. I pre-sew a panel and then cut the rectangles and applique the pieces later on. So it's nice and easy. What I like about making this is you have no control over the fabrics. When you're sewing, close your eyes, put your hand to the bag, and sew next one, and sew next one. Let the fabric do the thing and make it truly a scrappy quilt.
I have to guess that for some of your students, this is like really a big deal. I mean, it's very difficult to just let go, right?
Yes, but notice that in life, we don't always have a control over.
Really?
So we just have to let go sometimes. Yes.
Spoken from one mom to another, right?
Yes, especially when you have a teenager. So you just go with the flow right here. If you decide on another shape, like a diamond, it's wonderful to use a template, and you have plenty of them in your book. You will. We also have acrylic templates that you can use, and you will place it on your panel and you will cut it out your shapes. You will end up with beautiful
Look how
little
cute those are.
diamonds.
Oh, they're just adorable.
Yes, and in case there is a little bit of a waste on the bottom and the top of your panel, then you can take those two, sew them together, and put the diamond right over and cut it. So no waste at all. Once we have our shape cut, just like in our triangle exchange, the finishing fabric are calling the shots and tying everything together. In this case, we're gonna make a little table runner.
Let me hold this up.
Yes.
Is that just adorable?
Cute little 6-point stars and a those are leftover from leftovers from leftovers. So it's kind of nice to use up all and have fun with it. I'm gonna take some of those diamonds, lay them into my blocks, sew it together, finish up with the lighter pieces to accent it that indeed it's a star. Put a binding, and it makes a beautiful table topper on your dining room table.
Okay, now this little table runner and the other quilts that we're looking at are in the book, right?
Yes.
And we're just drooling over these. When you go home, they're going to be wet from all our drool. That is
You let
slobbering.
Oh, thank you.
There's probably a nicer way for me to say that. I think it's beautiful.
But it's the biggest compliment. Thank you very much. If, in case you want to do something larger, you can take the same diamond and make little tumbling blocks. And notice it, what the fabric does. It creates a secondary design, and it just plays.
I want to hold this up too. I want to make sure everybody checks out the binding on or the edge of this. Was that difficult to do?
No, you come up to the corners, you stop.
We aren't quite, there we go.
And you turn your binding around, line it up with the edge of your quilt, stop on the outer corners, again, in just one step at a time. Sometimes it's one day in life, or sometimes 1 hour at a time. So just like with this binding. And the secondary design that this quilt gives us really is rewarding for as much work as we have to put into it.
Okay, now look, log cabin, it has to be one of the best. Look how striking that is.
Well, that's another result from fabric exchange. In this fabric exchange, you have to agree with your friends that you are going to exchange a certain size of a strip. In this case, is 1 inch. So everybody needs to cut the fabric to 1 inch. No making panels. You just bring your strips home and start making log cabin blocks. But it is so wonderful to use other people's fabrics and some choices that maybe you did not see in a store and you didn't buy it. Or maybe you want to share something that it's difficult to use it all by yourself. You cut it to pieces, give it to your friends.
And can you hand me this gold strip over here, please?
Yes.
I mean, this really is a rebel. And people might look at this and go, well, this simply cannot go in here. But the fact of the matter is, it's things like this that it truly will make your quilt sing.
When I see fabrics like this, I immediately see the centers of my blocks. So I grab those. I want to exchange with those ladies. So notice that in this one, I got a bunch of strips that were in pink, and there were no light, neither they were dark. So I used those pinks in the centers instead of my reds.
Okay, so now the spool quilt. Oh, please, does it, I don't want to, I'm going to scoot all this over. Let's just make room for this spool quilt.
I like that.
I mean, let me tell you, folks, it doesn't get better than this. I can see Ricky coming over. Ricky, you need to hold up the corner here.
Again,
I will.
Yeah, I took the panel, cut some bases, and then put them right into it. Notice it that the top and the bottom are the ones that are holding it down, anchoring the craziness, the scrappiness. And this is truly the friendship spools, where all my friends gave me some strips and I put it together. One of the spools fell down and I finished it with the applique that come up from it. The applique is drawn from my applique silhouettes, what are very nice to use. And because I love Aurifil thread, I had to have an orange thread in the center. And all the button stitch appliques is done with the threads that I have brought it, and one of the viewers will receive that.
Now look at this right here, right here. Right in here, right here. Look at this, the little scissors on top. I mean, it's just the details like this that make these quilts just over the top.
Thank you.
You know, Alex, I think that Edyta, because of her creativity and imagination, she comes from another planet, but I'm confident that that planet is both beautiful and scrappy.
Does she take house guests?
I'll go.
I will too. Well, in the same show, let me think, it was 802.
Right.
She taught Ricky how to use quarter square triangles to make scrappy quilts.
She sure did. And just remember, if you like what you're seeing today at any time, you can go back and watch more of each of these individual artists. And as in the case of Edyta, you can watch all of her shows. Just type in her name in the search bar.
But don't go anywhere just yet, because recently when Ricky was solo hosting on location in Phoenix, he was taught a valuable lesson on how to use contrast in scrappy quilt blocks from the Stash Bandit,
Yep.
Diane Harris. It was so good.
Let's talk about contrast. Just what is it? I know that there's words in the world of art, contrast, value, and so forth. So we're going to try to do a little definition and get some visual examples.
Exactly. Contrast is really just the difference between things. You don't have to make it any more complicated than that. Values are, if you think about fabric, value is just the lightness or darkness of a fabric compared to its neighbors.
And that's important because there's a relationship involved in value. I mean, yes, you can say this is, let's just look, this is a medium value, we could say that, but next to this is light.
Yes.
But next to this is darker.
Exactly.
So even though it is medium, it does have to do with the relationship.
Yes. So value and contrast work hand in hand, kind of like Reese's peanut butter cups, where you have chocolate and peanut butter, and they're different things, but they're working together.
Yeah.
That's how value and contrast are. So I wanted to show you a little bit about how contrast can work in a quilt block with fabric. And so we're gonna start with a block that's really low contrast. This is a very simple block, but it's made of half square triangles, and it's a nice way to demonstrate this idea.
Okay, and I just want to say that on the paper here, this is kind of what we're striving for. Is that the idea that this is relatively dark?
Yes.
And then we have the medium and the lights. That's
Yes.
kind of where we're headed.
Right, so you could put the darker fabric here if you wanted, but we just colored them differently here so you could get an idea of how the different values could work. Yeah, let's go to the fabric.
All right, so let's go to fabric. So this is the same pattern, same
This
design.
is the same block, and in this one, there really isn't much contrast at all. You can't really see that design popping out at you.
It's like a mystery.
It's kind of a bad mystery, not working so well. Contrast is what makes a design visible, and if you don't have enough contrast, the design doesn't show up.
Okay.
So this next block,
It's a little better.
a little better. You can see it a little more, but this is a good place to say you can't ever make your decisions about value and contrast from this distance. You really need to put it up on a design wall and stand back.
I'm with you, sister. Okay, because here's one thing, but well, even at a quilt show, you don't walk right up to the quilt. You're seeing it from a distance.
Exactly. No one is ever going to look at your quilt from here first. And if your quilt's dynamite, they might come in for a closer look. But this is not real life. This doesn't actually give you a perspective of what's happening.
So here's my comment, because I'm the guy that likes to find positive. Okay. I think that the diamond has stuck out a little bit, but even though these are all kind of reddy or pinky, I think they're the ones that are still feeling a little bit lost on this for me.
Agreed.
Okay.
So this next one, I tried to solve that problem a little bit by using the same fabric in all four corners so that the pink red kind of pops out a little bit more. And so this is one that would probably work okay in the bigger picture of the quilt. And from a distance, you could probably see that design pretty easily.
Okay, very good. Next one?
The next one, I tried to make it a little higher in contrast, but I sort of failed.
I'm going to put these side by side now so that we can see this is where we're at now.
Yes. So when I got this one all made, I realized, oh, I didn't do such a great job. And as I looked at it, I realized the problems that sometimes you run into. If you have a fabric where this area is quite a bit darker than this area on the fabric, sometimes that can kind of mess up the eye. So if you were to substitute something a little higher in contrast, that would help.
Right. Now I'm going to do A and B.
Sure.
So there's nothing really horrible about that, but I can see that there's a little bit of dark versus light, so you could just say, I'm going to take care of it by changing that patch.
And also sometimes when you get to this point, it's a little bit a matter of what you like, what your tastes are. Some people like less contrast, more blendy things.
And I'm kind of wishing that one might get a little different.
Yes.
And I mean, honestly, because of what you're teaching me, I kind of want to change out this guy on the corner, but we don't have a pink one, so I can't do that
We don't
today,
have a
okay?
pink one, but you get the idea.
Yeah, sure.
Those are some of the problem areas you can run into.
All
So
right.
then this last block is pretty high in contrast, so it's pretty evident what the design of the block is.
And would you say this is too much, or is there such thing?
Well, there isn't such a thing as too much, but there is such a thing as dull. One of the reasons I love scrappy blocks is because they're a little more interesting than a block where everything is exactly the same.
Yeah, sure. And I do too. I love seeing the visual variety that can be achieved, especially from scrap quilts.
Yes. So here's an interesting thing. I think you could make a dynamite quilt if you only thought about value and didn't think about color at all. But the opposite is not true. If you just thought about color and you didn't think at all about value, you probably couldn't make a dynamite quilt.
Which goes back to that saying we all know, color gets all the credit, but value does all the work. So, yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Ricky, I was really sad not being at taping in Phoenix.
Well, you were missed, but you were home recuperating from major surgery.
Yes. Well, fortunately, I got to watch it on thequiltshow.com, just like the rest of you. And Diane really had great tips on how to make your scrap quilt sing, both with contrast and then later on the show using cohesion in scrap quilts.
Absolutely. I love that we have created this treasure trove of shows that we can all look back on and refer to as valuable resources.
Still ahead, we have one more scrap artist that we think you will want to see in action. Ellen Lindner is making a mini scrap art quilt with no stitching right after the break.
Here we go. On the next Quilt Show, quilt artist and teacher Phyllis Cullen loves to make fabric faces that have a story and a soul, and she's been making fabric faces for over 20 years. See the artistry of Phyllis in her incredible fabric portraits. Phyllis spent many years of her 40-year career as a doctor traveling around to the third world countries helping to fix broken faces. Her story is so inspiring. Now, watch how she creates a face with her layered technique. Then, Phyllis adds realism with what she calls contour quilting, and she says you can do it too. Plus, Lauren Volchek returns to the Quilt Show to teach us how to create hand-drawn quilt labels. After all, if you're going to make something beautiful, you need to label it. And why not make it beautiful? The talents on this show are undeniable, and you won't want to miss it on the next Quilt Show. When we were on location at that fabulous home in Austin, Texas, we featured the adventure quilter Ellen Lindner. In learning about her, we discovered that she spent her career as a flight instructor before she fell in love with fabric.
Watch as she takes scrap quilting to new heights with a super fun mini fabric art project.
Ellen, our adventure, we're coming in for a landing now, right? And you call it sticky fingers.
Oh my gosh, I'm wiping my hands right now because I always tend to get my fingers sticky doing this. What we're going to be doing is glued collage. So we're making fabric art with no stitching. And the advantage there is, A, we can work with little tiny pieces that would be too small for stitching.
Okay.
And B, there's a few steps that you don't have to do. There's no quilting, there's no binding, and there's no adding a sleeve.
Do your students love this?
They do.
What do they love most?
I think that.
All of that you just said.
The part that you're done. You know, when you
Right.
finish your composition, you're done.
Well, and fabric lovers love to use fabric regardless how we're using fabric. We want our hands on the fabric.
Absolutely. Now, let me tell you the supplies that you need for this. Some of them are a little bit unusual maybe to quilters, and you might have to make a trip to the art store. First thing that you need is a canvas that has the staples on the back.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a thick one, but most people do prefer that. Because it has the staples on the back, then we're able to put artwork on the sides and use the sides as part of our surface.
Okay.
So we're going to take advantage of that. The second thing that we need is the glue. And go ahead and take the lid off and let's let people see it. It's called gel medium, gloss gel medium.
Ooh, it's really thick.
It's like gooey plastic. It is gooey plastic.
Okay.
It is the same thing as an artist thick acrylic paint without any pigment.
Oh, okay.
And collage artists use it as a glue because it does not turn yellow.
That's
so
fabulous.
we're going to water it down,
Okay.
but you could also use it straight and you can attach all kinds of
right.
stuff that way. You do want to probably protect your surface. Have a few paper towels on hand for those sticky
Right, we
fingers.
got 'em ready.
Yeah, and black electrical tape, which I'll tell you about that one later in the game.
Okay.
And a
Yeah,
few-
because I'm like, wow, we're going to the
Using
construction store
electrical
now.
tape. And a few other things that I'll tell you about as we go.
All right.
So you also want a container for your glue. I like my container to have a lid because that becomes my resting spot for my brush.
Okay.
And my brush is foam. Whenever I'm working with glue, I want a foam brush so I don't accidentally glue the bristles together
Okay,
on,
all right.
on my project. So, of course, we need some fabrics. I like to use, you can look at these examples, maybe 6 different fabrics that are similar, 6 or more, for the background. And we're going to cut those maybe fist size. And then, of course, we need the fabrics for whatever design we might be making.
Right.
It could be abstract or it could have a design.
And I'm just holding these up so we can all get a little bit of eye candy for a moment. Because
Sure.
they really are fun and beautiful.
Right. And what I like to do, rather than having my fabrics join each other with a real obvious line, I like them to sort of integrate a little bit.
Okay.
So I like to give them a jagged edge.
All right.
And I'm
Well,
gonna
that sounds
show
like
you-
a lot of...
It would be if you were very intentional about it. So I have a shortcut way to do it. So what I'm going to do is purposely scrunch my fabric into my blades as
my
I'm
God.
cutting.
I never knew that.
And look at that wonderful irregular
Can we see
jagged
that?
edge that you get.
Yeah, we can.
So much better than say a
It's
pinked
so hard
edge.
to see, but yeah, you can see that.
You want to try it?
I will try it actually because I've never done that before. That is amazing.
And
so
you just scrunch it in there.
just scrunch and you scrunch as you go.
Right. And as you're pressing down, it's kind of holding it in place for you.
It does. I see.
You can even steer with it. You can even,
All right.
you know.
Well, I
see
know
what you got.
I've got a squiggly
Oh
wiggly.
man, yeah.
But there you go.
Yeah, you're a star. So that's great because we could never get that kind of irregularity if we were, you know, cutting it all intentional like.
Hey, Mama, I did something new.
So I like to do that. So I'll prepare a bunch of fabrics first, and you can see I've got some jagged edge going here. And then from there, it's just like decoupage. I don't know if you did that back in sixth grade.
Well, it's been back in the day. Yeah, absolutely.
So you put the glue down, then the fabric on top, then more glue.
Okay.
And I've mixed my glue to maybe the consistency of whole milk,
Okay.
maybe slightly into
Buttermilk.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
Maybe slightly into the cream
Right.
category there. I don't want my brush to be too saturated, so usually I'll just push it off on the sides there a little bit. And then as I'm using it, I can lay it right over here.
Okay, when you did these 2 pieces, you had already put some medium on there, right?
Right, and so now it's dry.
Okay, all
And so
right.
now we're going to do the next 2. Let's figure out where we want to go. No, I want a little more overlap when I get to the edge. How about right there?
Okay.
So we're just going to smear it on.
I like that word. Smear.
Yeah, that's a technical term.
Yeah.
And then smear some more on. Now this is where I tend to get my fingers sticky
Sticky.
because then I always want to get
Okay,
in
okay,
there,
okay,
and
okay.
which of course you can do with a brush, but I never tend to be quite that neat. So that's all that's involved. And what I generally do is move from the center out. And when I come to the edge, I do not yet want to glue the side.
Oh.
I want to put some pieces here, but I don't want them to overlap.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the glue on the front only here, the
All
top,
right.
even though my fabric is going to lap over.
Eventually.
I want the fabric to wrap around to that side, but I'm not ready to glue it.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I've still got my brush wet enough, and so I know it doesn't have any color. It's hard to see, but I'm putting glue right up to that edge, but not onto the side.
Right.
But then I'm going to arrange my fabric so that later
It will.
It's getting a little bit dry, so again, later I'll be able to wrap that around the edge. You can see me get my fingers.
I see why you call it sticky fingers.
Sticky there, okay? So you would do that all the way around, glue only on the top front, and then with just little bits hanging off like that.
Okay. Now I have a question because this is new for me. Do you want enough fabric to reach to the bottom or just enough to go over?
Just enough to go over.
Okay.
Because we're going to add some more there on the sides and on the back. And then we're going to leave that to dry overnight.
All right.
So now this one has had that operation, and so we can see all of these fabrics that are flopping over the edge here. And now it's ready to have some fabric added to the sides and onto the back.
Okay.
Now, I don't want to glue all the way up to the edge of the canvas. So I'll either create for myself a reference line, or maybe there's a straight line of staples that I can use.
Okay,
and so again, just like I did on the front where I stopped the glue at the edge, here I'm going to stop the glue at that reference line.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
So let's see, which one of these? I think I'm going to work on this side right here. Now this time I cut the fabric a little bit differently. I cut it with a straight edge, and that's because I'm going to tuck it in here on this side and then wrap it to the back. And so that's going to allow me to tuck that in there. Let's see if we can get where we can see what's going on here. So I'm going to tuck it right down in there.
Very good.
So I'm doing the sides and all the way up to my reference line on the back.
Okay.
I'm going to tuck it in there.
You really fooled me because I thought you were going to put your straight edge on the line and wrap it over to the other side. So you fooled me. Just letting you know.
You're
tricky.
See, I'm going to have to try that. Maybe there's a way to do that. And again, I'm trying to glue only up to that reference spot. Okay, so I think that's pretty good.
Okay.
And then, of course, as we continue later, not quite ready to do it there, you would just start
bringing it around
pieces.
So they overlap.
Yeah.
That's
and so that's
really,
going to take care of the sides.
that makes so much sense.
Now,
and that's, to me, that makes more sense than just trying to keep going. And I see you got a little gap right there that you could just stick something in.
So I'll come and put another piece that probably needs to lap around the corner. I'll glue it up here and lap it around right there. Here I've got the same thing going. That's because I'm kind of working upside down here.
I understand. I totally get it.
But you get the idea.
Yep.
Okay, so over here on the corner, I'm going to do the same thing. And so I would wrap it here, glue it just as we did. And then when you get to the top here, you're going to have a lot of excess fabric.
Oh, like a little box.
So
like
you're just going to have to, you're just going to fold it just like you would a gift package.
Okay.
Do get some glue up in these corners where you have fabric sticking to fabric rather than just fabric sticking
so it all
to
holds.
canvas.
Yeah, get it all stuck.
So you would do that. I'm not going to actually show you. You've got
but
the
that's
idea.
Fun. Yeah, I really love
And then
this.
the same thing on the front. It's going to need to have some little folding, so you decide, do I want to fold it this way? Do I want to fold it this way? But you're going to have to do something like that there.
I'm going to peek on these because I just want to see what you've got
going
there.
Yeah, there's a nice little fold showing on that one.
Yeah.
Here's a fold.
Sorry, hopefully, Jim, we're not giving you too much trouble with the camera, but
there's a nice little fold.
Yeah, that
on
looks
that
great.
one. Okay, so again, just like a gift package, you called that correctly, and then leave that overnight to dry. Now we're ready to start thinking about a design. Let's move this whole stack over here.
All right.
And so the little design that I'm thinking, yes, maybe.
All right, we'll keep it handy.
So the little pattern that I'm thinking about is just one that I drew. So of course you could do something abstract. You don't have to do pattern things, but if you're going to do a pattern, you would need to have that on hand. And I'm going to use a technique for transferring it to the background that might be a little bit new to some of your viewers, and that is I'm going to use a product called transfer paper.
Okay, let me just hold this up so we can see that.
And this brand is called Transdoodle. You can find it at your fabric store.
Okay.
And what it is, it comes in different colors, so yellow, blue, and white.
Okay.
What it is, it's the equivalent of carbon paper, but instead of having graphite on it, it has chalk.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Which will wash off, and we do need it to wash off.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, the glue is going to wash it off for us.
Okay.
So if we wanted to use this, we put it chalky side down. We put our pattern on top, which I've already done, and then using something blunt. Here I've got a dead pencil.
Okay.
A dead ink pen will work.
Sure.
Something like that. Then you're going to trace over the lines, and that will transfer to your background.
All right. Are you able to do one little mark to show us how it transfers without
sure.
being a problem? All right, so there was the scratch.
Oh,
and,
it's just very light.
all right, it's hard, a little hard to see, but I can see it.
And
right
so
there.
if it is a little hard to see, then you come in with your washout pencil and just
and then make it whatever you
up
want it to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Make sure it's all washed out.
And it looks like that's what you've done here. Is
That's
that right?
similar.
Okay,
You're on
all
the right track. That's similar. Okay, so here we have it. 3 different stages of things going on here. This is what I drew earlier. So comparing it
Oh, I
here, we
see
can
it.
see
The
what that
yellow
is.
marks right there.
So
Yep.
yep. It's subtle, but certainly you can see it. So that's 2 purple pieces and a white. I'll pull those out in just a second, and that would be the next thing I would do to place, to glue. This one I finished gluing and it's dried. This one I finished gluing and it's dried, and it's got a little bit extra on it. You're gonna grab my
I'm
pieces
grabbing
for
those
me?
because I know you're headed
Yeah,
there.
that is where I'm headed. So let's see. I'm going to sort of dry fit this first. Now we got a little bit of an issue that we have to think about, and that is, as soon as we hit this with glue, we are going to erase
Oh, the
any lines.
Right. So
we're going to do it little by little.
okay.
Okay, I'm not going to take time to do the whole thing. You would, of course, trace and cut out these little bits in your usual fashion with a light box or whatever. And I'm going to glue just this one. Because I know I'm going to erase things, I'm going to hold one end. I'm just going to, yep, there goes my lines. I'm just going to glue one end.
All right. I think that's a super helpful tip. I know that if I was doing this my first time, I go, oh my God, I drew all the lines and now they're all gone.
Right, it's tempting
So,
to
yeah.
put a big swath of glue in there, and then of course you've lost all your lines. So do just a little bit at a time and you can finish that up.
Okay.
Now, what I often find on these is that they need a little bit more definition. For instance, here my purple flowers have disappeared into the green background just a little bit. So this is optional, but what I will often do is use a permanent pen, white or black, to simply draw
That's
on
what you've done.
just the way you would add stitching for contrast. Yep, it's done on that one too.
No, but here,
Let's go ahead and look.
yeah, because I thought this was stitching, and it's not.
It
It's
certainly looks like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It
Yeah.
really, really does.
Yeah, and so just drawing that on there for definition.
All right, how do we finish these up? Alex, come on in here because we need to get to the big
it's
to-do with your...
so easy. And so this is where that electrical tape comes in, and I've already applied one piece. The first thing that you do is trim off that fabric that wasn't glued down. Remember, our glue only went so far.
Right.
So we can trim that off, and that gives us a more or less straight line to work with. Cut one piece that goes in here, and then we would continue with all the sides all the way around. It makes a really nice finish.
That's great. Let's
It's
just
beautiful,
let's
just
show one
beautiful.
over here.
Super fun.
You know, Alex, seeing all of these great ideas, well, I want to get home and get my scraps out and get busy.
Me
You
too.
do?
Yes. We hope that in watching all of these masters of scraps that you've learned something too.
And we are all part of a diverse community, talented artists and quilters. It just seems like the possibilities with scrap quilting, well, it's endless.
We want to thank the artists that we featured today, starting with Bonnie K. Hunter,
Lynn Carson Harris,
Susan Carlson,
Edyta Sitar,
Diane Harris,
Ellen Lindner, thank you all. Because of your love of working with scraps and what you teach, it really is a new day every day.
Hey, and thanks for being a part of our TQS family.